Ah yes, Portal. Utterly charming and mechanically brilliant, this game is one of the best of all time at forcing the player to think in a completely different way to solve puzzles without being incredibly frustrating. Thinking with portals is a phrase that gets thrown around, but what it essentially means is that the game is forcing a player to switch their perspective and analyze problems in a way completely foreign to them. The fun of the game then stems from getting incrementally better at thinking in this novel space. Making such an unusual mechanic work requires a special kind of tutorial, and Portal absolutely knocks it out of the park. The entire first half of the game is meant to steadily get you acclimated to thinking in this unfamiliar area. What I want to do today is break down the first several test chambers in Portal and talk through the learning the game designers are intending. The Portal mechanic has a ton of depth to it, and risks being very confusing if the concepts are not introduced properly and at the correct rate. Portal properly spaces the different pieces of the mechanic across the beginning of the game to keep the player in flow while teaching them everything they need to progress in the game. Let's get started. Chell wakes up and begins pointed toward what looks like a potential door on the outside of the relaxation vault. The designers are trying to make sure that you notice this pseudo-door frame and the countdown timer above it, but for now let's move on. The designers begin by using some up-tempo music to juxtapose with the prison you're apparently in, creating a sort of mental dissonance. Portal also takes this opportunity to begin introducing you to the controls in a non-obtrusive way. Much like the first screen from Level 1-1 in Mario, the player is being given some space to explore the controls without the game pressuring them. The prompts are off to the side and translucent, and the time the player is given to mess around with the controls is simultaneously used for backstory from GLaDOS.
And learning are the primary goals of all enrichment center activities. Serious injuries may occur.
The next scene is the most important in the whole game. The doorframe and timer you saw originally, and its twin inside the prison, become linked by a portal as GLaDOS counts down.
The portal will open in 3, 2,
The player's first look through the portal is like a kick straight to the brain. The mechanics of the game are summed up so perfectly in just this one moment. Portal is elegantly introducing the mechanics of the game by showing this scene, with an angle unlike any effect you've ever seen in a game. It's utterly jarring, and yet it perfectly sums up the core mechanic. Two disparate places in space can become adjacent with the portal. It is the pivotal first moment in a series of learning events the player will experience over the course of the game. I personally believe much of Portal's successful learning curve stems from this one moment. The rest of this level introduces our basic goal for most rooms in the game. Find a way to open the door and make it to the elevator, mostly by placing boxes on switches. The reason Portal uses this incredibly simple room in the game is twofold. One, it acts as a downward slope on the game's interest curve, giving the player time to stew on the important scene they just witnessed. Two, the game is very careful to make sure that the player doesn't end up in over their head. When operating in space this far outside what humans are used to, it's very easy to get quickly overwhelmed. If taken at face value with a dash of text prompts, a lot of these tutorials would feel patronizing and sluggish, but Portal neatly dodges it by turning the necessary information into interesting backstory as it's explained by our digital warden.
The patient grid will vaporize any unauthorized equipment that passes through it. For instance, the Aperture Science Weighted Storage Cube.
The room ends with one of the more prescriptive pieces of information, the explanation of the end of the level field. But even this is couched in GLaDOS' character and serves to fill space as we take an elevator ride while the next level loads its textures. The next room shows us how we can access different areas with the two portals. The level is constructed such that we can watch the game show us the concept of moving portals. By design, all of the portal's exits in the cycle are visible through the glass, and this mechanic is presented in an environment that we get to explore and approach at our own pace. The game is teaching us how portals work in space without having to tell us a word. All the tools necessary are already there. Following this, we get the first half of the portal gun, which allows us to play with one portal. The gun makes obvious audio cues when firing to make sure that the player understands that this is the source of the portals. Once the player receives the gun, you'll notice that any portal that was in the pit has disappeared, requiring the player to use the portal gun to advance. It's a quick gating mechanic that ensures that the player doesn't move on to the next thing until they are able to do the task we're asking them to. In this case, use the gun. Also important to note, the game hasn't given us control over both portals yet, just to ease us into the mechanics. The designers know they can still make interesting puzzles with just the one portal, so they do without adding the second portal until the player gets acclimated to the first. The separation of labor between the two, as it were, serves to tone down the complexity. The next test chamber is a simple puzzle that has you begin thinking in terms of portals. It teaches you the first two basic techniques for crossing obstacles: shooting a portal near yourself as an entrance, and shooting a portal to your destination to exit there. The team is leveraging the time the player has with only half the portal gun to shallow out the learning curve while still creating interesting puzzles, and teaching a fundamental skill for traversal that you'll be using throughout the entire game. I'm gonna stop here, but honestly, Portal is teaching you something new basically in every single test chamber. Go through the next couple and see if you can figure out all the elements Portal is introducing and reinforcing. If you're feeling super confident, go through all 19. It'll be good practice. We gotta get going, but feel free to follow up the discussion in the comments. So long.